Well, good evening to you. Once again, so good to join you for another edition of Salem Speaks. We are indeed so happy that you have joined us once again for this educational forum that is sponsored by the Outreach Ministries of the Salem Union Baptist Church. Once again, we have part number 2, and joining us from last week, we have Mrs. Charmaine Sinclair, and Charmaine is the Deputy or Assistant Director of Education, Planning and Research Section, the Planning and Research Division, the Ministry of Education, Department of Education. I know that's a whole lot that I said there. And then once again, we have Dr. Philip Swan with us. He is the registrar at the Ministry of Health. I cannot say too much about that, and so I'm just going to start with Dr. Swan. If you would just tell us a little bit, Dr. Swan, about yourself and what it means to be the registrar at the Ministry of Health.
All right, so registrar really is just a position in the medical field. So it's not the registrar, it's just the position is registrar. But my responsibility lies within the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, with responsibility for national programs in the areas of maternal and child health and non-communicable diseases. I'm also presently working with the ICT program as we try to digitize our services.
Okay, thank you. And then Mrs. Sinclair, so I am going to say up front again, if I say Sister Charmaine and I also say Mrs. Sinclair, that is because Mrs. Sinclair is serving in 2 positions here. She is actually from the Ministry of Education, and she is also a member of the Salem Union Baptist Church. So, Sister Charmaine, could you say a little bit about what you do at the Ministry of Education? What are you responsible for?
Yes, sir. So I'm responsible for the Planning and Research section of the Ministry of Education, and that section lies in the Department of Education. We look at the status of education in the country. We report on that status by gathering data from our schools and our satellite offices. We speak to programs that have been implemented in the Department of Education as well as policies implemented. We monitor their progress, and then we report on those programs and policies.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charmaine, for explaining, and also to Dr. Swan for explaining more of what they do. All right, now let's get back into our questions on school reopening on October 5th. We know that there are so many challenges out there for parents, for guardians, all who play a part in the educational aspects of children's lives. They have been out of face-to-face schooling now since March, and now it is time for them to go back into school. We know it is so important, children's education, and that's why we are actually taking it on in our first 2 segments of Salem Speaks. The importance of children's education, of them going back to school, whether it's any of the 3 portals that was mentioned last week. But I am going to ask, first of all, Sister Charmaine, to say to you, how do you prepare your child for going back to school? Parents, guardians, what do you need to do in order to prepare your children for going back to school? And I want you, Sister Charmian, to also expound on those 3 portals that would be offered with respect to schooling.
Okay. So there are several ways that parents need to begin looking at for preparing students for the reopening of school. The 3 models I'll speak to first in terms of what will be implemented by the Ministry of Education, and those learning models would be face-to-face model, the one that we are accustomed to, and as Pastor mentioned, I guess the one that we're most comfortable with traditionally. The face-to-face will be engaged in on those islands that the public health authorities have given the okay in terms of conditions being that there are few positive COVID-19 cases on those islands. And so on those islands, students will be engaged in face-to-face learning with all of the safety protocols in place. They must wear their mask. They must sanitize. They must be socially or physically distanced in the classrooms as well as on the school's campuses. Same for the school staff. In terms of the safety protocols, they must engage in those. So that's one model, face-to-face. On 4 islands, we will have what we are calling the remote or virtual model for learning. And one of those 4 islands would be New Providence. So on New Providence, we open on October the 5th in the virtual or remote learning model. That means that the children will be engaged in the education delivery via online learning in a learning management system that the Ministry of Education is implementing. That 3rd model is a blending of the face-to-face and the remote or virtual model, and we call that the hybrid learning model. And in that model, you will have students, some of them on campus, some days a week, while others are online learning. So we are minimizing the risk or trying to reduce the risk of them actually coming in contact with this COVID-19 virus. 3 models. So parents, in order to prepare children for any of these 3 models, because at any given time we must be flexible enough to shift from one model to the next based on the health conditions on the ground as well as the human resources that we have available. So parents, the first thing that we need to do is ensure that we have the tools necessary. And the tools would include the devices that children would need in the virtual model, but also face-to-face, and because some levels will be attending school in the hybrid model at some point in time while others are online, and then this means that we are utilizing the tools, the digital devices, at all times. Whether or not you're in face-to-face or in virtual, we are integrating the technology in the teaching and learning process. We also need parents to bear in mind that your children need to be healthy, whether or not they are on campus or they're in the virtual learning space. Healthy so that they are able to participate in schooling. So we're encouraging parents to ensure that you have your children take those vaccines that they're supposed to take. Ensure that they are sleeping, so maintain those sleep habits. You're going to bed on time, you're getting up on time. Ensure that they're healthy in terms of the nutrition, what they're eating. So this is not the time to be binging on the junk food just because you say school is closed. We still need to be healthy in body and in mind in order to learn. These are the kinds of things we're engaged in.
Okay, Sister Charmian, I just want Dr. Swan to chime in there right at that point. I might need to get you back. But Dr. Swan, I want you to chime in there as to how both parents and children need to pay attention to building their immune systems up so that they are not open to easily catching the virus, in addition to paying attention to the various protocols. Talk to them about what they need to do, parents and children, with respect to building their immune system, particularly as we are readying for the flu season as well.
Correct.
So that they can fight off this virus as best they can. Talk to parents and children about that. What do they need?
So if you look at the whole process of preparing to go back to school, I know we've been disrupted in our school habits in the last 6 to 9 months because of the COVID-19 and the pandemic and entering the country. So we've gone off kilter, so to speak, as to what it is that you would normally be doing.
Right.
So when it comes to preparing to go back to school, or preparing in general, we are trying to advance the idea that you are to live healthy. You try to live a healthy life, proper balanced diet, exercise, rest, and of course your spiritual health is important regardless of what's going on with you.
Yeah.
You would have noticed that last year, the Bahamas has had a rough 12 months.
Yes.
You know, it started with, about 12 months ago with Dorian, and that knocked people off kilter at that point. Persons who weren't directly affected because they weren't on Abaco or in Grand Bahama were impacted because their relatives lived on those islands, and they had in some cases to support them from one way or the other. So getting square meals, 3 square meals with your snacks,
right.
Including your access or your intake of fresh fruits and vegetables.
Right.
Ensuring that if you're eating, try to get half your plate to be vegetables.
Right.
Cut down on the saturated fats, cut down on the salty foods,
right.
on the high sugar and junk foods that you talk about. As Mrs. Sinclair mentioned, establishing and maintaining a routine as far as possible helps the child and the parent to be able to cope and to function well during these times of stress. Right. So in preparing to get back to school, you go through the things that you normally go through. You try to go to see the doctor to make sure your child is well, right. The dentist to make sure their teeth are fine. Right. You get their eyes checked. You do the book shopping, back to school books, supplies shopping. You ensure that their immunizations are up to date. Even though they may not be interacting, you want to make sure that certain things that you do on a regular basis
right.
Are maintained, because those are the baseline things that are going to not just protect the physical health of the child and you as a parent, but also the mental health of that child and maintaining that routine. It's going to be very key to that child being able to function well and to be resilient against all of the stresses that will come to him out of quote-unquote nowhere.
Okay, I intentionally place parents there as well, Dr.
Correct.
Swan, because when we listen to various news reports concerning COVID,
they're stressed out.
Yes. And the need for parents to remain healthy in order to see to it that their child
and that's an ongoing challenge, especially in our context.
Yes.
Parents tend to go all out for their children
Right.
and neglect themselves.
Right.
And one of the things that we would advise parents to do is to pay attention to that self-care, right. to find a space at least once a week right. where you're with yourself, right. in your own mind, de-stressing, debriefing yourself, so to speak. Because you can imagine if you have 2 children in the home, let's say only 2 children in the home,
right.
and one is doing homeschooling, right. Meaning online schooling, and the other is going out.
Right.
You have to be able to figure out how you're going to balance those two, balance providing the care and support that that child that's going to be at home requires, ensuring that he or she is not doing things other than schoolwork on
right.
the computer during school time,
right.
if you're able to do so, because
right.
again, parents have to go to work as well.
Right.
But bearing in mind also there's a different timetable.
Right.
You now have to get your child out of the house and out to school on time,
right.
and then to get the child back home on time.
Right.
But still, you have a child at home that you have to pay attention to. So
Amazing.
you rely on that kind of, you try to figure out how you're going to balance that, rely on whatever supports you can find on.
Yes.
The church, of course, is a good support, but also the challenge with that too
yes.
is now that you're home, you have to figure out, well, do I have to cook for my child all the time?
Yes.
How is he or she going to get their snacks on time?
Yes.
What are they going to get? How are they going to feed them? And so some of these things that are out of your mind when the child is out of the house
right.
remains in the top of your mind
yes.
now. So you can imagine the number of stress stresses
Yes.
that parent has to manage.
Right.
And that's just the child and the child's education. You're not
Yes.
talking about whether or not this person is working, what other responsibilities would have happened before. So
Yes.
finding a time and space on a regular basis, either it's very early in the morning when you're spending time with God,
Yeah.
to get yourself ready for the day, realize that at this time, and it's only for a while, quote unquote,
Yes.
it's not forever.
Yes.
It's only for a while. It's a sacrifice that you're going to have to go through at this time
Yeah.
to make sure that you are able to put your children on their
Yes.
best
Yes.
footing.
Right.
So that when they're finally out of your house, yes, they're out of your house, and they're out of your house.
Right.
That is that.
Yes. Could I speak to particularly to mothers, because most of the homes, I'll put this word in inverted commas, are manned by women, single mothers. And what Dr. Swan just laid out there tells you the kind of pressure that single mothers find themselves under. If you have two children, Sister Charmaine, you have two children. One is on virtual. The next one is going to kindergarten. This is one mother now, and the virtual school starts at this time. You have to go and deliver, be a taxi cab, you know what I mean, to drop off another child to face-to-face school. How does a parent now do this? And not parents now, particularly 80% will be single mothers. Speak to that, Sister Charmaine. How are they going to cope with this?
And it is a great challenge. And this is where I think I mentioned last week, where we call upon our network, our community, our families. This is where relationship now comes into the picture.
Right.
Who do we rely upon? Who during this time do we call upon? Families coming together, aunts, uncles, cousins, those responsible persons in our lives. People we've been asking as we speak in our stakeholder groups, people who have children in the same classes, how do parents now come to pool resources?
Yeah.
Single mothers, single fathers, because we can't leave them out.
Yes.
And we kind of think Nassau-centrically in terms of what happens on New Providence, but our family islands as well.
Yes.
What do we do in terms of pooling resources, coming together as a community, offering that assistance? And then Ministry of Education also, as an education provider of opportunities, now having to take into account these kinds of situations. What do we do now as those who are the servants of the people in terms of utilizing all of the resources that are available?
Yes. Before I get to the next question, I just want to say this to our entire listening audience. Whenever crisis like the pandemic rises, like Hurricane Dorian did, it gives us, Bahamians, an opportunity to really rise to the occasion
Yes.
and show that we can be our brother's keeper. Listen, you might not have spoken to the person that lives right next door to you. This is the time to broach a conversation. This is the time to say good morning and good evening, good afternoon because now we need network more than ever to assist in educating our children. Now we can lean on each other and help one another. Carpooling, as you mentioned, Sister Charmaine, get to know one another better, become a part of certain civic associations within the community, become a part of your church. this is a time when we can learn to build relationships, build our networks, so that together we can raise our children. This is a great opportunity. This is not a time, parents and guardians, for us to throw our hands up in despair, but together as community now, we can, that's my pastoral little word I gave there.
Pastor, I just wanted to
add to that too.
Yes.
add something else to that as well. Because we look at our country's economy and we see a downward turn.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who are not employed, and even with the businesses, the corporate world, if we were to grab or hold of what you just said, turn crisis into opportunities, is there some way that businesses can create spaces where those same single mothers who would normally have to make a choice between either going to work or staying home, if they can have a dedicated area where that child who would have normally been homeschooled could come to that particular area, and there is a rotation where persons are able to take their hour at this time, and you just sit with the children who are being virtually schooled at another time. In that way, it's a win-win situation, because the business still has those persons who need to be there to work to carry the business, and the parent has their mind at ease because they know that the child is there somewhere nearby where they can have someone who's watching over them. So using crisis for opportunity throughout the community.
Thank you. Dr. Swan?
I was going to expand on exactly what the Sister Sinclair, because you go back a way as well, mentioned. This is time, I think, for companies that are open to strengthen their employee assistance programs, to ensure that there are mechanisms in place to support that employee, whether that's going to be working at home or in the office. It's the first part. The second part, I think this also is an opportunity for the civil service to revisit how it does business, how it operates, how it assesses its employees. Is it that I need my employee to sign in here at this point in time and sign back out, and there's no measure of what they do during the course of the day to quote-unquote show me what they're worth? Or do we now need to transition to a point where we're talking about results? So whether or not my employee is sitting in front of me, whether or not they signed in on time before the line was drawn, at the end of that time period, I have deliverables that this person has provided for me that makes the business profitable. And then go back to something else that Charmaine spoke about earlier. We also have to be cognizant that, and this came out a lot in Dorian, the society has broken parts. And so, whereas in healthy families, there is that relationship with the sister, with the brother, uncle and aunt that you feel safe that you can leave your child with, a lot of persons, even though they have that network is not a safe network. And so we need to find ways where we can offer persons the opportunity or helps, so to speak. And I think this is where the church comes in. Some extent, some civil societies come in. But this is where it is time for us as brothers and sisters in Christ to step out and to provide that safety network that we may not have in our homes, in our blood relatives. I think we mentioned it last week. We're talking about those retirees that may be able to provide some level of support and assistance. This is where you come in. This is how you assist, because it's going to be key that parents, and especially females, who themselves may have been abused as children, are going to be very keen and very hawkish as to who is going to watch my child while I am at school, while I'm at work, and trying to take care of my family. And that in itself is another level of stress that we cannot negate. We have to pay attention to.
So much going on. There's so much going on with this pandemic that is cumulative. There are cumulative effects that could be negative, but at the end of the day, with the help of our neighbors, when I say neighbors, I mean our goodly neighbors, with the help of our networks, with the help of our churches, we can make a difference. Sister Charmaine, back to school and parents' preparation for schooling. Do children still need to, or do parents still need to purchase uniforms for their children? Number one. And next, do they need to purchase physical education like PE stuff? And then I understand that at schools they need insurance. Are all of these still requirements? Do you still require them to do these things even though they are going to school April 5th? And I'm talking those who are part of the virtual school only. Do they need to make that investment at this time?
All right. So that's a very good question, and one that has been asked of the Ministry of Education. Initially, if we're in the virtual, and those 4 islands would be New Providence, Abaco, Bimini, and mainland Eleuthera. Initially, we're not requiring students to wear their uniforms as they're sitting in front of the camera, as they're engaged in online schooling or virtual schooling. We do ask that they are properly attired, that they come dressed as if they are prepared for learning. And we know what that means as Bahamians. We know what it means to be properly attired. We know what that means. But initially, no, the emphasis is not on getting the uniforms, on paying the insurance, as you're saying. Now, mind you, when we are free to go back into the face-to-face, yes, those school insurance payments would most likely be required, particularly in these times. But there is also the provision for those who are not able to purchase the insurance for the student. We know that children under a certain age, particularly public school students, are able to access public health services free of charge. The key to all of this, though, is that we're asking parents, please ensure that all of your contact information is current, up to date at the schools. There are many times when schools are calling parents and that number was changed 5 times, or they moved from that location, or they no longer work at that place of employment. So that is key. But no, at this time, if you are at home and you are not utilizing insurance normally as your family would have utilized insurance, no, we're not requiring that payment. No, we're not requiring the uniforms to be worn, but they need to be properly attired.
Okay, yes, and devices. Let's talk a little bit about devices before I go back to Dr. Swan. Could you say to parents and guardians, Sister Charmaine, what devices are required for what ages?
Yes.
Please speak to that. What in the computer world, what kind of processor, what kind of gigs, all that kind of stuff.
Good.
Speak to parents about the ages and the devices that are required for parents to purchase. And secondly, is there any help from the government in procuring these devices?
Yes.
Yes.
So we would have recommended specifications and certain kinds of devices, not brands, but kinds.
Right.
In terms of lower primary and preschoolers, they can utilize the tablets. And these tablets should be ones that have built-in Wi-Fi. They should have enough memory, 2 gigabytes or more, so that they're able to in some cases, download a few documents. They should have a front camera and a back. The minimum for the front would be 2 megapixels. And for our high school and upper primary students, We are suggesting that they have either laptops or notebooks. These should be Wi-Fi ready or have built-in Wi-Fi. Of course, they would need the webcams so that they are able to interact in the videos with their classes, their teachers for the live classes, so they're able to be seen and they're able to see teachers as well. The learning management platforms that we are using would require that they have the webcams, they have the built-in Wi-Fi. And the operating systems, we're not saying that you need to go get a Mac.
Right. I was about to ask that question. If you need an Apple or if you need a Samsung.
If you want to get an app, that's fine. Sorry, an Apple, that's fine.
Yes.
But the operating system should be Windows 10, at least that. We know that there's going to be quite a number of students who learning on demand is going to be key. This idea of being in the virtual and having lessons delivered online could cause some people to be apprehensive, but other students now, I spoke to one of our teens yesterday in our Pulse Youth meeting, and she was saying, I always wanted to have online classes, always, and now my school is doing it.
Yes.
And so I thought about that for a while because most young people, they want to be engaged face to face. They want to touch their friends. For her, this is the key, learning on demand. She could go back to those lessons. She could download the live lessons. She could go back into the resources that are stored in the library for the online, the virtual, particularly in the learning management system. And she could watch those lessons over and over and over again until she gets the concept.
Right, right.
Yes.
I wish I had that while I was in school. That would have helped me a whole lot in terms of, you had to keep up actually with the teacher.
And write all those notes.
Write all those notes. Now you have the advantage of having a device where you could replay. So in all of the crises, there are some good. And Dr. Swan, let me get back to you. In terms of the health of our children, because this is a great concern. The great concern for parents, for grandparents, for guardians is, I am afraid to send my child back to school whenever this happens, because on some islands there is face-to-face teaching. What are some of the signs? What would be some of those signs that parents ought to look for to see that, first of all, in some instances, my child is depressed, is not doing? What are some of those signs that a child is not well? What should they look for to say, you know something, I think I need to check out, to take my child to the doctor or something, because something is not working well?
Right, so we did touch on this last week.
Yeah.
And so it's good to go over it again.
Right.
And it all begins before your child is unwell. So you have to have an understanding as to what your child's baseline personality is. Because any change from that baseline personality, any little change, is going to be key to you picking up anything that may represent a larger challenge. And so, again, you would know who your child is, his or her personality, and monitor that on a daily basis. Bear in mind that your anxiety will become your child's anxiety.
Right.
So don't think that because you are biting your fingernails and fretting and your child seems to be happy-go-lucky, that a child is not being affected by that, your personality or your traits. And so you have to be careful that you are not transferring what it is that you feel onto the child and projecting onto the child. No, the child is picking up or mirroring what he or she feels from you. If mommy is afraid that I might catch something and I'm afraid that I might catch something, because then who's going to protect me if I catch something? And so then that's the general observation of your child. Now, as we mentioned offline, off camera last week, my children started school this week. So one is in virtual and one is in
in-
face-to-face.
Yes.
And so this face-to-face school has a checklist
Right.
that the child turns in every morning before he or she goes in.
Right.
And before the child goes in, right, and it has the temperatures readings from the night before in the morning, and whether all a whole list of symptoms as to whether or not this child has a runny nose, cough, fever, vomiting, you know, any sign that this child may be unwell.
Right.
And you are to tick yes or no on that form, and of course, then yes means keep your child home. And I think this is the same thing that the education ministry has promoted, because health is recommending, and it's not just in the child's situation, but also in the adult situation.
Right.
Wherever you're going from one bubble to another, quote unquote,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you are not carrying anything with you,
Right.
and in return, bringing something back into the household. So it's going to be very key that parents pay attention to these things. Again, as seen on the screen, they monitor the child's body temperature. As physicians, we tend to tell parents that they are not old enough to put their hand on the child's forehead to see if they have a fever.
Yeah.
As for grandmothers, you're not, sorry, I mean grandmothers as in those who are 65 and over.
Yes.
And not those, you know, other grandmothers that are a little younger these days.
Right.
But get a thermometer.
Yeah.
A digital thermometer that is
Yes.
easy to use, that you can record the temperature. Again, you observe for symptoms.
Yes.
And then keep your child at home if they're ill, or you even think that they may become ill. And key to also your child being back to school is what Sinclair mentioned earlier.
Yes.
You have to have working contacts.
Right.
Your cell numbers must be correct and working. Have minutes on your phone.
Yes.
Because the parents, teachers maybe need to call you to say, come get your child. Your child has deteriorated and needs to go home.
Right.
Or someone in school has had an outbreak or gotten ill, and your
Yes.
child is exposed. You need to move your child from the situation.
Okay, good. Let me ask this question concerning anyone who comes back home, a parent who has been to work, a child who comes home. I think this is a protocol that I've heard many persons do. When somebody comes home from work, what should they do? Should they take their shoes off when they come in the door and take all of those clothes and put them in a separate bag by themselves, and then wash them in the washer with some kind of steam or all that stuff? Talk to us about what happens when the child comes home to get them ready to come and be with the family. How should that work?
Right, so there are recommendations, and then there's real life.
Yes.
And the recommendations that have been floated on is that when you come home, you go into a separate part of the home,
Yeah.
you defrock,
Yeah.
take your clothes off, put them in a bag somewhere where they can be laundered, washed.
Yes, yes.
Whenever you have a washing time to wash. Some persons rarely have a washer in the house that they can use to wash their clothes,
Right.
quote unquote, on demand.
Right.
But if you look at the general population, especially persons, even if they have a washer,
Yes.
they may not have electricity,
Right.
they may not have running water. Persons are out of jobs. So you have to gauge how you keep yourself safe.
Right.
So as far as possible, you try to keep yourself distant, physically distant and uncontaminated while you're in the public.
Right.
So that when you come home, you can do this, you can go through these motions
Right.
of trying to, as far as you
You
can,
can,
take
yeah.
off your shoes at the door, wash your hands, of course,
Yes.
wash up to your elbows, or wash any
Yes.
areas of your skin that has been exposed while you were out, wash your face,
Right.
and try as best to keep those clothes separate until you can have them
Until you can
washed.
have them washed, okay.
But, I mean, not but, that is the recommendation.
That's the recommendation, yes.
Understanding that that is probably not something that everyone can do.
Right.
You as a parent, you as
Yes.
an adult, as a guardian,
Yeah.
determine what is the best thing
What
that
is
you
the
can
best
do
thing? Okay.
based on your circumstances.
Right.
And don't stress about it.
Okay. Thank
Because
you.
you can't change what you can't change.
Can't change, yes.
Just live with it and figure out how you're going to make the best of it.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Now, I was reading in the paper this week, Charmaine, of a grandmother. I don't know if you saw it, but a grandmother was in the paper with 3 of her grandkids. We talked about devices. And grandmother was saying, I have no way of having these 3 children, these grandchildren, reside with her here in New Providence. The mother lives on another island. And between her and the mother, they do not have the wherewithal to purchase these devices. They are in different categories, these 3 children. Is there any help? What help is there? Is the government providing that help for Grammy with those 3 children that have varying needs with respect to devices? And if so, how does she get that need met?
So yes, that is really a challenge that several or many people may be facing at this particular time. And if you look at the situation that was described, I'm thinking that most likely that family would be clients of social services already. I'm thinking that, but that's not always the case.
Right.
If they are clients of social services, those children, once they're of school age, are automatically enrolled on our National School Lunch Program. Those students whose names are on that school lunch program and persons who are still being vetted by Ministry of Social Services, those students will receive devices from the government of the Bahamas. They will receive. There are others who may not appear on that National School Lunch Program list. And what the government has thought to do would be using several strategies. One, Ministry of Education has been in talks with BTC and Alive up to Monday of this week, and they've reached a point of agreement. So low-priced packages for devices as well as for internet connectivity, because we could give devices.
Yes.
But if you don't have the internet in your home, you're still not able to access. So low-cost packages from BTC and Alive, they will announce very soon what those packages look like, but they will be below the cost of what persons would have normally paid for devices as well as internet connectivity. The Ministry of Social Services, as well through their urban renewal program, are making all of their urban renewal centers Wi-Fi free, up to a point even outside of the center. So persons are able to come in and connect on those devices. Let's say you live in an area where there is an urban renewal center. And so the Minister of Social Services would have talked about their centers having Wi-Fi that persons are able to come in and utilize. The government of the Bahamas has also promoted through Inland Revenue Office your VAT-free school supplies. So persons who need to purchase and say, okay, I got this amount of money, I can't pay that VAT. Those devices, wherever you go in the country, are VAT-free. All right, so if you need a device and you go to purchase, VAT-free. There is also some negotiations going on, and some companies, I can't say which companies at this particular time, but there was a call that was made to the planning section today to find out if we had the name of every public school servant, every public school student in the country. We need to supply the names because there are persons who want to make donations, but they want to have the names of all of these students and contacts for them. So that's why I was kind of emphasizing you need to have updated information because they are willing to give, but they want to know that they're giving these devices to people who are really in need. Because I may say, oh, Dr. Swan is donating. I already have a tablet. But I think I'll get another one from Dr. Swan, all right? And we want to ensure that everyone has access to a device. So these kinds of negotiations through the government of the Bahamas, through other service providers in the country, corporate citizens who have stepped forward and said, I want to give. These are the kinds of things happening.
Thank you very much, Sister Charmaine. And I just want all of our listeners to know that if you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions on any of the platforms, whether it's Facebook or YouTube. we'd be happy to see if we can get those answers for you. Any question that you might have, please, you can go ahead and send those questions now. We'll be able to have them answered as best as our panelists can do so. I just wanted to plug in at this particular time as well that many of our churches in the communities are presently used as homework centers. A number of churches have ongoing homework sessions. At Salem, we offer that now for the surrounding community from Monday to Thursday from 4 to 6 p.m. during the school term. Anyone in our neighborhood can come to our homework center, actually have computers and internet services available. I am just asking for anyone who is listening to this program and your church has a room where you can sponsor some computers. I'm sure some businesses would be happy to help you to put some computers in there. All you would need to do is to provide the human resources necessary to be able to help these students get their homework done, or now not even homework, but this is what they do all day now, particularly in New Providence. It's virtual. So if you can open up a classroom at your facility where these children can get internet services, please, let's do our best. Let's not wait for the government to do everything in these instances when things are very tough. Let's do what we can to assist our neighbors. Right now, in our particular area at Salem, here on Taylor Street, we actually have a database of all of our children, Sister Shamin, who do need devices. And should the government not be able to provide those devices, we will step in and do our best to provide those devices. And I think if everyone can do that in their particular neighborhood, you know of the people that need equipment and devices, please go ahead and do it. Here is a caveat I would give to all persons who help. If you believe that no one is going to defraud you, you will never do anything. You're going to have to take a risk and do something. Somebody is going to pull one over on you. But the majority of what you do will be for good. And what that does is that gets us or pushes us to get to know our community so that you know the persons who are in need. So I want to challenge associations, I want to challenge churches, I want to challenge everyone to get involved. This is a community effort where we can help our brothers and sisters. Let's not allow our children to fall through the cracks. Education is foundational to the growth and development of our children. I was just mentioning the other day that our young people today, when you notice them on a device now, they have a phone, they don't want to text anyone because they can't text. All they do is give voicemails. If you see, sometimes when people only want to do voicemail, you say, hey, but why don't you send me a text? They never send you a text. Education is foundational, and we want to do our best to see how we can assist in making sure that it happens. So, Sister Shamin, I'm going to ask you your final question, and then I'll do the same thing with Dr. Swan, and if there are no questions, we'll wrap up this session. What, Sister Shamin, what should parents be doing during this time? They are trying to manage all this. What should parents be doing during the day to ensure that their children are doing what they are supposed to do? And children, speak to children out there, because some parents might have their children. what should they be doing to ensure that they are getting done what they should be getting done?
All right, so I'll take that in two parts.
Yes.
First of all, as we move closer to October the 5th, there are some children like our preschoolers and our special needs children who we need to bring along in terms of they will be wearing masks or in some cases masks and shields,
Right.
and they're not accustomed to that.
Right.
So we need to gear them towards that now. Parents should be modeling. There's no use you telling that child they must wear a mask all day and they never ever see you in a mask.
Okay.
We need to be having conversations with our children, all of them. If you're going to be in the virtual, there are certain protocols, there are certain behaviors that are acceptable and some that are not acceptable. So we need to have those kinds of conversations with them now. In terms of the discipline, particularly our older children, our secondary students, you know, we think that we know things and they think that they know more than we know.
Right.
So they should be in class paying attention in the virtual, and if you check the computer, there are at least 4 pages up. One, YouTube, and
Yes.
particularly if they have on their headphones.
Yes.
YouTube is playing, they looking at the teacher but paying no attention, or there's a game going on somewhere there.
Right.
So parents need to be wise to these kinds of things. Every once in a while, if you're home with them or there's someone who's home watching or governing them, walk by the computer screen, touch the mouse, see what's going on.
Right.
So these kinds of things, but have the conversation with them, get them to realize that this is, as Dr. Swan said, only for a season,
Right.
but learning is supposed to be taking place to take you through life forever.
Right.
We need to keep these things in the forefront of,
Right.
of our children. And then finally, there are some of us who have children that do have comorbidities, who will not be able to go into the face-to-face for some time.
Right.
So we need to advise the persons at our schools, particularly if it's a public school, of what these are for our children, if they have asthma, if they have some other symptoms, so that the Ministry of Education can ensure that that child is in virtual schooling. That
Right.
option is there.
Right.
But we need to have something to say that, a medical letter or something from a noted physician or someone certified as a physician in
Yes.
our country.
Yes.
Preparing our children in that way, preparing a
Right.
quiet place for them to be learning as all of this is taking place and getting all of the necessary tools ready for them.
Right. Thank you, Sister Chairman. And then, Dr. Swan, finally to you. Some parent or guardian will send their child to school, whether virtually or they will begin school, and they will not be aware that that child might be challenged. You didn't, as far as you know, you growing up a child, you know, some parents just say, oh, well, yeah, I think they're just a little slow. Or so, and they don't recognize that there are some challenges. What should they look for? Because they're not going to a regular school where a teacher is there and going to, in some cases, be able to come and say, you know, Dr. Swan, I think so and so. What do they look for to see whether, you know, I think my child might need some help?
So I get your question. I just want to say something about Sinclair said about the asthma situation. You spoke about preparing your child for school.
Right.
Part of that preparation is ensuring that their chronic illnesses are managed.
Right.
Asthma, acute asthma attacks usually happen when you are not paying attention to the triggers or you're not doing the long-term management to maintain your child's airways
Right.
so that they don't get into an asthmatic case.
Right.
As was mentioned in the press conference on Monday, having asthma as itself is not necessarily something to keep you out of school.
Right.
Right.
You just need to make sure that your child has his or her inhaler and that you are managing the child through the chronic medications that the doctor has provided for that child
Right.
to prevent him from going into an acute attack.
Right.
Now, as it relates to the child that may have special learning challenges,
yeah.
again, this is not something that will more than likely pop up overnight.
Right.
This would have been something that you would have been told to by the child's teacher in the past, or anyone interacting with the child. Even you would have had your own suspicions. This is, of course, the time where it may become crucial that you are honest with yourself,
Right.
that my child needs help.
Right.
Let me now go to special learnings, called SPED, Special Education Department at the Ministry of Health,
Right.
and get my child some sort of assessment to
Right.
determine what it is do I need, what it is that is required to get my child the assistance that he or she needs to
Right.
take full advantage of every educational opportunity that will present itself.
Yes.
And this also may be an opportunity for the education system to identify special packages that
Right.
can provide these children with special learning needs
Right.
the tools that can enhance the way that they learn. Because we are, I mean, we are at the stage now that we're giving children computers,
Right.
which is a major boost for children with special with learning disabilities.
Right.
Then I think this, again, advantages,
Yes.
leaps us forward to that position
Right.
where we're doing more for our children with special learning needs, and giving the child is taking advantage of every opportunity that is out there. Because things that you and I or the teacher can do with that child would never get to the amount of digital information that's out there, digital resources that are out there that can help that child to even excel. So the important part is being honest with yourself. It's not your fault.
Right.
It's not the child's fault. It's a situation we find ourselves in, and we have to deal with it, because at some point in time, we're going to leave off this scene and leave this child here, and you have to find as much as possible, make this child able to take care of him or herself.
Right.
And not necessarily be open to abuse and
Yes.
other things that may come with in the society for children
Yes.
who are not normal, or adults who are not normal.
Yes. Thank you very much. Well, my fellow guests, Sister Charmaine Sinclair, Dr. Swan, it has been our pleasure to, certainly our privilege to have you share all of the wealth of the knowledge that you have with our audience concerning going back to school. This can go on for quite some time, because people need so much information and so much help with respect to their children's education. They are very concerned. It has become very costly in order to do this. There are so many things going on. But I just want to encourage you, parents, that you can make it. There are enough persons around you. Just reach out to those in your community. Reach out to your church. Reach out to the Ministry of Education, whatever your need is. Don't stay silent and allow your child to be disadvantaged. Let us all do the best we can to develop our children through the educational system that we have. Once again, thank you for joining us for Salem Speaks. And on behalf of my guests, Mrs. Charmaine Sinclair, Dr. Philip Swan, it was our pleasure having you. Have a wonderful evening. God bless you.